Welcome to Property Quorum. Now, those of you who've been watching us for more than once will recognise some of the faces here. Of course, Juliet of Gunner Cook LLP, Hamish McClay, our Lord Master of Such Convey, and friend of the show, and often appearing on many other podcasts with us, Wendy Gibson of the First Time Buyers Club. And today's topic is likely to incite distemper, a distaste, and even a disbelief, if you like. Especially after the panorama last night. Property Quorum today, a growing grey area around property advice. And of course, to start us off, as is traditional, Hamish McClay.
Well, our three words that prefixed that growing grey area were buyers beware. Again, we do bring up this concept sort of quite regularly of the buyers being aware, although much that we can see is transparent, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see it, would we? There is an awful lot that we don't see, and a lot of it is understood. Now, strangely enough, what was brought out in Panorama wasn't anything new. There are many of us who work within the property sector are very much aware of it. Probably what we don't realise is the full depth of what does actually sort of go on in an unregulated sort of sphere. We speak, and particularly Chris, who wasn't able to join us today, he speaks of this. He said, far better not to have the regulation. Yet there are some areas which do demand regulation, and it could well be this. But it's not so much just what the unfortunate buyer or seller, for that matter, who are let loose in, they're wanting to move on. But there is so much advice. Like we say, there's an overwhelm of data. There's an overwhelm of advisors. You've got your estate agent, you've got your would-be sort of gurus that sort of come onto your LinkedIn's, your YouTube to tell you all of these wonderful things that they know, and they can impart this wonderful knowledge, and this is what you should do. However, you should do what you need to do. Sometimes we don't know exactly what we need to do, but there is so much confusion out there. How the heck do we wend our way through it?
Well, I have to go to one of our esteemed property experts, Juliet. Juliet, when there's people around that supposedly we put our trust in to enable us to complete a property sale or to get the finances to get that property sale, and it turns out in the background they're actually in cahoots. How is anyone supposed to get the right advice?
But this is exactly it. You know, the topic, a growing grey area. Who's caused this area to be grey? It's the stakeholders involved in the area that's caused it to be grey. There's no reason for us to have this middle ground and all of this sort of confusion if there are clear-cut guidelines. So you've got policymakers saying these are the rules that have come in, yet they themselves can't interpret the rules. So what you find is that one branch of individuals are interpreting rules one way and others the other way. We've been talking about the accountability of certain stakeholders. The first point of contact are those estate agents with the clients. They shall be held accountable for what they're saying or how they're selling, etc. And there's none of that at the moment. You know, by the time it gets to solicitor stage, and I always say, look, you have to choose the right solicitor. We've banged on about that, you know, over and over. You have to choose the right solicitor, but when you are instructing a solicitor, that solicitor can only go on what you've given them, so to speak. Yeah. They're not a detective. They're not going to find things that, for example, if your estate agent said, yeah, there's never been any flooding, and your seller hasn't disclosed that, they've had some insurance claims, which quite frankly is misrepresentation, then where does that leave you as an individual? I act for some foreign buyers, and they are quite frankly spooked by the quality of valuations that they get. And why is this valuer churning out those valuations? Because the valuer wants to protect itself against potential claims. But instead of treating each matter as an individual matter, they are saying, beware of this and this and this. And when a foreign national who's not fully aware of you know, the English legal system or the English property law system looks at that, they think, oh my goodness, I've got problems with the loft and I need to get building regulations and what's this? that's not, I think if you know your job, we're meant to handhold and guide and not lie and exaggerate. And for the people that create the grayness in the property arena, they just need to be cut off. And the way they're cut off is by adding penalties and levels of accountability to what they contribute. So if you're lying blatantly, then you should be subject to misrepresentation claims. And it should be easy enough to issue these claims and penalties against these individuals so that it is a deterrent to other people looking to contribute to the grayness of the industry. But I think
are you saying that regulation is the way forward?
100%. And not just a white paper saying here's regulation. It needs to be done properly. It needs to be policed so that it actually makes a difference to the property system. You know, if you're presenting someone with a house and there are issues, you should not be allowed to lie and then say, well, actually, it's only what has been discussed between the solicitors that's binding. Nothing we said pre your lawyers actually makes. What is the point of that? You know, and if we're looking at people chasing commissions, etc., that's another bit of the industry where, you know, I'll be doing a loan and I see a broker getting a commission, you know, a 50 grand commission on a deal that I'm being paid 2 grand for. You know, that needs to be made clear to a buyer, a borrower. This is what you're paying, etc. But what are they doing for that? Was it the introduction of the buyer to the lender? What are they doing for that? So it's the same way that the estate agent is commission based. These things need to be made clear. Some people hear the word commission, they don't even know what it means, you know. But the reality of the situation is, if you are whatever role you play in the property process, there needs to be full disclosure. And you need to make sure that the recipient understands what you're disclosing. You don't just use these highfalutin terms and they don't understand and they're ashamed to say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And the pushiness of some of these estate agents, that sort of sales marketing mentality, this is someone's life that you're playing with. And if you're playing with that, you should pay the price for lying or misrepresenting.
Wow. Wendy, it turns out that Juliet firmly got on our orange box this morning with a means to wave the sword. Should more people be waving the sword?
I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that we are really lax on here in the UK is enforcement of regulation and rules. And it really is beggars belief how, and I've seen this time and time again, and I'm sure Juliet has seen the same thing, where you are supporting somebody buying a property only to discover either that the loft hasn't actually been built to proper fire safety regulations. And even though it's being used as a bedroom, the house is then being sold as being a bedroom, when in actual fact, it's not really, could not be classed as a habitable space and therefore should not be considered as an additional bedroom. Or, for example, one that I've been dealing with today alone is a house that's been sold off and been told, people have been told that it's a freehold house. They've actually now in the due diligence part of it, and they've discovered actually it's a freehold house with an absentee landlord. And get this, the previous buyers of the property discovered exactly the same thing, and that is why they pulled out of the property. Was the information then updated by the estate agent to show that it is actually a freehold house, to give buyers the full information that they require? No, it wasn't. And that really should be, the estate agent should be held accountable for not updating the information as it's become, as it becomes known. It really is appalling that they get away with not updating, not putting forward this material information so that buyers can make informed decisions. And yet we wonder why so many fall throughs happen in the industry. This would be why.
Thank you, Wendy. Hamish, in a world that, let's face it, you preside over when you're creating those searches, surely it's as clear as day when these things. Shouldn't the buyer beware at that stage, or am I thinking fancifully?
Well, I think in fairness, I mean, but both Wendy and Juliet have sort of intimated this. Many buyers come in. First of all, they're shy with regard to sort of coming forward and and getting sort of, because it's something they're not experiencing very often, there are certain things they perhaps ought to ask, but nobody's told them to ask those particular questions. They're going into it sort of shy. They're almost going into the whole sort of situation blind. Situation that I was involved with, which reinforces with both what Wendy and Juliet said. And interestingly enough, the estate agent wasn't Connells. It was another estate agent. In fact, not quite as sizable as I can't remember the estate agent now. However, what actually happened, the buyer had approached me. He was paying in cash. And he actually sort of said to me, could I sort of help out with the searches? I said, oh, of course I can. I can sort of certainly help out there. He said, well, what should I do? I said, well, you've obviously looked at the property. He said, well, I haven't actually looked at the property yet. But I just believe it's a, in fact, it's an ideal sort of place. It's situated just on the outskirts of Oxford there. I go actually sort of, I sort of look at it. I first of all pick up the detail from the, which we can actually do. We pick up the detail from the local council, and I see that basically there's a couple of things been going on there. There's allegedly a loft extension. There's no building control, no comment about the building control or anything of that nature. So I pulled the surveyor in anyway. And in fact, the first surveyor I approached says to me, because I know a few surveyors, as you would appreciate. The first surveyor says, I prefer not to actually, Hamish, because I've already looked at the property. I've already carried out the survey on behalf of somebody else. And I said, oh, what was the conclusion? He said, well, unfortunately, I'm not able to disclose that. I said, oh. So, of course, the writing was on the wall there. But anyway, second surveyor actually goes in. And now the thing is, obviously the first surveyor reported back, so the estate agent would have known the reason why that previous sale failed. And he said actually this, because I did speak to the estate agent, which isn't normal practice, strangely enough, of a person in my position, but I was, of course, trying to help the buyer out. And the estate agent said, oh, it has failed on a couple of occasions. Well, apparently the boyfriend of whoever, the female that owned the particular sort of property at the time, he said, oh, I can do that. So he fixed the loft without the sort of appropriate sort of way of going about that. He also built an extension, and both of them were absolutely in an appalling state. And the surveyor said, I wouldn't touch that. He didn't actually put it like that. But when I spoke to him, he said, well, I'll put the detail together, Hamish. He said, but it's absolutely appalling. The good news is the solicitor we were working with at the time was one of those particular ones that just, if you like, they actually transferred and we moved on to another property in Bicester. But what we had is a situation there. The one surveyor couldn't tell me. Oh, he said he couldn't. Like, he's probably right in that respect. But the estate agent was fully aware of that particular situation and why it had failed the first time round and the second time round and the third time round. Because I think we're on to about the fourth offer, because the price seems so good. 4-bedroom property on the main road, sort of leading through Kidlington, very pleasant sort of village on the outskirts of Oxford. Sounds a bit too good to be true.
So, Wendy, if something sounds too good to be true, is this one of those things where it probably isn't?
Well, and it probably is far too good to be true and requires probably a little bit more thinking and exploration as to discover as to why. Right. And, we could also extend this discussion as well onto online advice that you get from all these so-called property gurus. One of the things that I really think should be taught in schools these days is what's called critical thinking. People need to actually not just take everything that's said at face value, but also I'd go even further than that and say you need to be vetting, you need to be checking that the person who's giving you the advice actually has the knowledge and the qualifications to give you that advice. This is why, for example, with solicitors, we rely on the fact that they are regulate or members of the SRA. We can look them up. We can see if they've got additional qualifications relating to conveyancing. We can then look at the likes of LinkedIn, see what their work history is like, connect with people that they know. ask people who've worked with that particular solicitor to get an understanding as to what they are like to work with, and how they felt in terms of the length, the breadth and depth of their knowledge. You know, I work obviously online and provide advice and guidance to first-time buyers in exactly this sphere. But I'm happy for people to actually go on to my LinkedIn profile, see the level of experience that I've got, and see that I'm not just one step ahead of them in the process. I've got nearly 20 years of experience in property transactions, and that, you know, should give me the credibility to be able to give them the comfort to know that I'm not just giving them rubbish advice or advice based on one small bit of experience in the property market. That
I've actually got a comment which I'd like you to react to, Wendy, and then I'm going to throw it over to you.
Sure.
Spencer has said, with Rachel Reeves reaffirming Labour's support for first-time buyers and access to the property ladder, should we be concerned about the growing grey area between political messaging, informal guidance, regulated property advice? And I'd like to hear from you first of all, please, Wendy.
So how Rachel Reeves is reaffirming support for first-time buyers is by getting the banks to increase, or I should say relax, their rules around their affordability checks that they do when it comes to the mortgage offers that they give. And also extending the risk. So at the moment, you know, there's obviously a general rule of thumb that we say banks will lend you 4.5 times your salary. Some can actually extend this up to 6 times your salary, but in very specific circumstances. So what Rachel Reeves is trying to do is actually get the banks to relax a little bit on their lending rules, to increase the amount that they are giving to borrowers, and also to allow them to earn less to be able to get more, basically.
Hang on a moment. Juliet, isn't this just heading towards the subprime disaster once again? Have I misunderstood?
Well, potentially, because even if you're borrowing or allowed to borrow more, you're still going to have to pay it back. So where's the affordability? You know, it's giving
magic
with
monetary,
with another. You know, you've got to look at the repercussions of it all. And I just think that's where we are. You know, it's almost as if you're adding an ingredient to the mix and then not actually looking at the effect of that thing. You know, and I just wanted to say, just, you know, very quickly, we're talking about, you know, agents not disclosing things to buyers or to individuals, but I had a situation recently where someone sent me, it was a probate sale, and the executor named on the probate had died, which meant that that grant of probate was technically void. And the seller's solicitors were happily pushing along and hadn't disclosed that to me. And had I not done my own research, I would not have discovered that. So the question is, had we completed, would I have been negligent because I didn't do further diligence? Or were they misrepresenting the situation because they weren't able to sell it in the first place? So it's one of those things where I think we've got to deal with each matter on a case-by-case basis. And if something looks too good to be true, as Wendy says, it probably is. You've got to dissect that thing and you've got to review it. And when you're looking at people online, yes, the vetting is essential. But what they don't do is they don't disclose the failures. They'll disclose, I've had this win, and make up statistics, etc. And I have this friend who does quite a lot of sort of research of these TikTokers, etc., these influencers. Yeah, he tends to go on their company's house and look at their company, and you can actually see their short-formed accounts, and you could see if they're doing as well as they actually say they're doing. And oftentimes they're not. So it's just hype to get a following, to sell you a program for them to make money off of you. It's not actually, you know, it's not actually true statistics. So it's a plug to get people who are none the wiser, especially these first-time buyers, which again goes back to Wendy, where you need someone who's been in the industry, who's ethical, who will handhold you and not tell you what you want to hear, but actually tell you what you need to hear to be able to make an informed decision.
Wendy, before I hand over to Hamish to close us out, you've commented to me before that we were saved from yet another property crash over COVID just because of stronger lending rules.
Indeed, because of the fact that stronger lending rules came into play after the global financial crisis, when interest rates skyrocketed after the COVID happened, we had so many fewer loans that failed because of the fact that we were adhering to stronger lending rules, which meant that people's finances had to be so much more robust to actually get a mortgage. So it sounds awful that it means that it's more challenging for particularly first-time buyers and people with a bit of an iffy credit record are able to get mortgages. But it really has saved us in the long run, and I'd even say it saved those people in the long run as well, because if you are a bit vulnerable financially and you only need even interest rates just to go up a fraction, and then suddenly your stack of cards of the debts that you've been robbing Paul to pay Peter, etc., suddenly they all come crumbling down. So I don't disagree that the lending rules were I think they were a good thing. We need to have robust lending rules in place. Could they be tweaked slightly? Maybe. Actually, the numbers have been crunched, and all of this effort that Rachel Reeves has gone to in trying to get the rules relaxed a little bit on lending is calculated only to help another 10,000 first-time buyers get on the property ladder. Now, when you consider there's usually around 250 to 300,000 first-time buyers every year, it's not really going to be pushing the envelope out that much, is it?
Spencer Collins has clapped back and said that with the cost of living rising and wages staying flat, how can professionals earning 30 grand a year, which is, well, I think close to where the average is, I think it's 26 something, isn't it? Save for a mortgage deposit in areas where property prices are high. Does this create a grey area? Can I just have this from you, Juliet?
Agreed. I saw some statistics yesterday about a household having £100,000 worth of income, and they weren't able to save for a deposit given the high cost of living. So 30,000. It's near on impossible. And that's what I'm saying, that, it's all good and well that Rachel Reeves thinks that, tweaking the rules or speaking to lenders to, change their lending criteria is going to help people. But there is a real crisis on our hands in terms of the cost of living. How are people, if you're in the middle of considering whether you can afford gas or food, how are you going to save for a mortgage? The house prices in themselves have exacerbated. So I have to agree with that viewer. It's near on impossible.
Hamish, would you take us home, please?
It's rather interesting that Spencer should be asking that question. It takes us back. Wendy and I think it was it last week or the week before, Wendy, we were speaking about the very subject of the hidden cost of moving and what you need to actually sort of look at. And of course, if you're stretching people even further, if there are 10,000 people are going to get onto the property ladder thinking, oh, wow, we can actually do this, that's 10,000 people putting themselves at greater risk because of the on cost of moving, because of items they haven't looked at. Do you want to go along with what Rachel Reeves is saying, or would you not be better off listening to an expert like Wendy when she speaks to you about it? Also about the saving, Wendy is the absolute ideal person to speak to because she's a realist as well, because she will turn around and say, well, look, for the time being, it's not possibly a good idea relative to your income, the rising costs, material costs, or what have you. Or she can actually sort of say, right, this is a way to actually take the steps to get you into that particular position. Because there will be people, and of course, bearing in mind that so many people offering this wonderful advice, they have a financial interest in your taking this wonderful advice, and they're going to gain financially from it. You won't necessarily gain financially from it. In fact, you need to be very, very careful. So back buyers beware. yes, again, do please beware. Do speak to the right sort of people. Unfortunately, we do get them on our podcast to actually speak to, and it's certainly probably another topic for a fuller discussion that sort of Spencer brought up relative to this new change. It just seems to be non-stop, doesn't it? All these ideas start coming forward and coming forward. They're not fully thought out as to the actual consequence of final results that are going to come about as a consequence of some of these. It will help on some occasions, but we need to look very carefully. So buyers beware. It's not a fatality. If you've looked beforehand, you've saved the day. You've saved yourself. But speak to an expert.
Well, caveat emptor seems to be the phrase of the day. I would say that with a property market which has been for quite some time heavily overvalued, relaxing rules on lending just seems to be opening the door to more misery further down the line. And as Wendy says, we're only going to help 100,000 and at least 250,000 a year in the position of trying to be a first-time buyer. It seems like putting a little bit of icing on the cake to make a rubbish cake look prettier. What I would say to everyone watching is surround yourself with experts. I'm very lucky that I'm surrounded by experts, as you can see here today. And Property Quorum is possibly the place where you're going to get some of the more truer statements about what's really going on about the property market. But who can I tell you? I'm just a man in a purple hat. Thank you all for watching. And please watch next week. We've got more of the same. We'll be dissecting what's really going on. Please don't forget our other brands. We've got Construction Matters, Property Matters, and of course, and tomorrow, our flagship in many ways, Cladding Matters. But thank you so much all for watching. Thank you, Hamish McClay, for having set this thing up in the first place. Juliet Babulal, our trusty legal eagle, who steers us absolutely down the right path. And of course, Wendy Gibson, with her many years having done this, she can actually look back as well as look forward, which is a skill indeed. Can I thank you all for carrying on this journey with us? And until next week, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and please try and look after that mental health. Bye-bye now.